So this video is going to look at aerobic and anaerobic exercise, and we've already looked a lot at that in previous lessons. This is going to sum up everything we've previously talked about. Now, all exercise needs energy, so our muscles can contract and we can move. And this is supplied by breaking down food, or glucose, by using oxygen. And if it does that, that's called aerobic exercise. So when we're using oxygen, it's aerobic exercise. An aerobic exercise occurs at a low or moderate intensity, so walking or jogging. So we're using oxygen to supply energy for those types of movements. Anaerobic, on the other hand, is when the energy is needed, but there's no oxygen available. So if you're doing sprinting or shot putting, the energy is provided anaerobically, so there's no oxygen involved in the process whatsoever. Aerobic activities are relatively gentle, okay, and you can do them for an awful long period of time. And normal breathing helps give you that oxygen. So if you are doing a cycle ride or a gentle jog, your normal breathing during it will supply oxygen, which your muscles need to get energy. Anaerobic, on the other hand, are very high intensity actions and can only be continued for a very, very short period of time. If you continue them for much longer, you get very breathless. Team games, for example, football or rugby, are a mixture of aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So be gentle at times, you're able to walk or jog, and then other times there'll be anaerobic, where you've got to sprint or do some intense form of exercise. The sports can be both, they don't always just fall into one. So aerobic exercise uses oxygen to break down foods, so things like glucose. And this reaction provides the energy for exercise. It produces water and carbon dioxide as a waste product. So if we were to look at it as an equation, we've got glucose and oxygen. So we use oxygen initially to create energy with the waste product of carbon dioxide and water. So it's really important you've got that equation down. In anaerobic exercise, there is no oxygen. So we've still got glucose being broken down into carbon dioxide and water. The same as above happens, but there's no oxygen. Instead, it's converted into lactic acid when we produce energy. So you've got glucose, that food source, being broken down into energy, what we need for exercise, and lactic acid. So lactic acid is a major cause of fatigue and is what makes you tired or stop exercising when you're doing some exercise. And anaerobic exercise can't be continued usually for more than about a minute because they're so highly intensive and they produce lactic acid. You can't continue them for a long period of time. And the buildup of lactic acids in the muscles causes fatigue, and it will cause you pain, and eventually you'll have to slow down and then stop. Another term you've got to know is Epoch, and this is the oxygen debt. Now, during short, intense bursts of exercise, like if you were to go for a really fast sprint, you're going to create energy anaerobically. Okay, so there's no oxygen available. And that produces a waste product, lactic acid, like we just talked about. Every time you do a sprint or something high intensity, it produces that lactic acid. And when it stops, you're still breathing heavily. So if you think anytime you've done a sprint and then you stop sprinting, your breathing continues to be really heavy and really deep. And your body's trying to take in the oxygen to repay something called the oxygen debt. Now, the oxygen debt is really because you were creating energy without oxygen. And that oxygen debt is known as Epoch. Okay, so every time you do a sprint or high intensity activity, that breathing afterwards is known as Epoch, which stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So excess, more, post-exercise, after exercise, oxygen take. So you've got your intake of oxygen following exercise. Now, Epoch is important because recovery from anaerobic exercise, you need extra oxygen to remove lactic acid. Like we said previously, oxygen can break down lactic acid, and you need that extra oxygen from breathing in heavily after doing a sprint to break it down. And that's why we breathe heavily after exercise, because we're trying to repay that oxygen debt. And how long we have that oxygen debt for depends really on how much lactic acid has been produced. And the amount of lactic acid produced depends on how strenuous or how intense, and also how long the anaerobic exercise lasted for. So the more intense it is and the longer it lasts, the heavier and longer your breathing is going to be afterwards. And it can take several hours to remove all the lactic acid produced during intense exercise.